Hello, welcome back to another Fabulous Video on my channel. I'm Jacob from Jacob's Books Corner, and today we're going to talk about the 15 books I read in the month of May, and we're going to jump straight into it because I am not wasting any time. I do want to mention, if there's any of these books that show up in any type of videos or whatever on the channel or coming up, I'll talk about them when talking about the said book. The first one we're going to talk about is Safe Haven, which I eventually gave a 4 out of 5 stars. This follows Katie as she runs off to North Carolina to kind of run away from her past, but eventually it finds her. Nicholas Sparks is known to writing kind of fun little contemporaries with really dark endings, and this stand no ground. I think this one, by the way, trigger warning for abusive relationships and stuff. It's the main plot line. It's shown aggressively throughout the whole entire novel, and also trigger warning for death of a parent, as well as that it's also a main plot line and is shown heavily throughout the novel, even referencing how the parent died. In case those things are sensitive to you, I wanted to let you know before you read it. And I really liked it. I really liked the adaptation a lot. I think I liked it more. Julian Huff and Josh D'Amelio, their chemistry was just off the chart. I'd really recommend the adaptation. The next book we have to talk about is Dial A for Auntie Q, which I read for my 4-quarterly vlog video that I did, where I read 4 books every quarter. I'll link it down below. I explain everything there. For this one, this follows a girl who goes on a blind date into murdering the guy, and her aunties come and save the day. There's a lot of other shenanigans and stuff. This is a wedding with an ex-lover and like all this other stuff. I'd say the trigger warning for this one that I would steal like very relevant is obviously death and things, because there's a death that takes place, sexual assault. It's never actually happens, but there is an instance where it could happen, and it's really shocking and aggressive. Is that my word for the video? I think it might be. Either way, for Dial A for Auntie Q, I just thought the writing here was the weakest point. Equaling the main character's voice in her head was super duper annoying to hear from. Also, the love story is kind of cliche, and so I didn't really care for it. But the aunties were really interesting, and I enjoyed them. Yet I had other people who read it around the same time I read it, because it just came out in April, who said the aunties were really annoying, and that they thought the whole book was really obnoxious, and that they just wanted it in. By the end of this book, I also kind of was ready for it to wrap up, as I had guessed everything. There was no huge shocking twist or whatever, and it's pretty by the numbers basic of you're going into a murder mystery. You kind of understand. Take that as you will. That's why it's a 3, because I would not recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. The next one I read, the second book in the Six of Crows duology, Crooked Kingdom by Lee Bardugo. I read this because I was binging the Grishaverse, and I have a whole video talking about Shadow and Bone and the trilogy and stuff, so I'll link down below. This video for Six of Crows duology is coming out in some point during June. This one I liked a lot better than Six of Crows. If you watched my last month's wrap-up, you would know that Six of Crows was a really big disappointment. Crooked Kingdom was a better disappointment, but it was still a disappointment. I ended up eventually giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars because the ending was so satisfyingly amazing that I gave a lot of quirks here. I think the biggest thing I took away from this experience is that I like Lee Bardugo writing in first person, not third. If it's a third-person book by Lee Bardugo, I think I have a harder time justifying my pickup, because I just don't think she can handle all the voices. I think a part of this, the reason why I got so annoying, was all the different characters and stuff, and I really like how the Curse trilogy only followed Alina. Whereas this one follows the Dredge Society, which is 6 different characters. All of them are really interesting and their own right, but none of them really popped. I had a few love people that I really liked. 4.5 out of 5 stars. Obviously, I highly recommend if you've read Six of Crows. The next book we're going to talk about is my next Nicholas Sparks that I read this month, and that is The Longest Ride, which I eventually ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. The problem with this one, this follows Ruth, Ira, Sophia, and Luke. Sophia and Luke I found much more fascinating. Anything that normally takes place in the past I find to be kind of boring if it's not in old Hollywood, and this was the same case. I found this one to be kind of boring. Ira and Ruth's romance is, but ultimately I found it lackluster. Sophia and Luke have enough problems and stuff to keep the story interesting and moving on. I personally feel like the interpersonal drama and the reasons why they end up having to break up several times throughout the novel was really idiotic and almost stupid. I also think Luke himself is kind of an asshole. He's a cocky little bit. The next one we have to talk about is Those Who Wish Me Dead by Michael Croyetta. This follows a boy who ends up witnessing a murder, getting sent off into protection service programs, and then sending off into a wilderness program where 2 hunters come and they start burning down a forest to kill him. We meet a whole slew of other characters and stuff, and it gets a little more complicated. I can say 4 out of 5 stars, mostly because I think there is a few plot holes that make no sense. But ultimately, I think it's a great ride, and I highly recommend it. It's not as fast-paced as I was hoping. It takes maybe like 100 or so pages to really pick up pace, but once you're in it, you're in it. The next one I read was Dear John John. Dear John follows John and Savannah in their tumultuous romance over a course of several letters. Savannah here I found to be kind of an annoying character. I really liked what Amanda Seyfried did make her a different character in the movie. I think Jake Tam brought a lot of depth to John as well, even though I think he is one of the better protagonists I've read from. I just think the book itself is overtly sad for no apparent reason except for being depressing, and so I eventually did give it a 3 out of 5 stars. I think it's a little gratuitous in the sadness. There's too many things going on here. No one can have a happy life, and so I just have to keep thinking that Nicholas Sparks was in a really dark place when he wrote Dear John. The next one was I was supposing was going to be a 5 out of 5, and it was a 4, and that is Heartstoppers Volume 3 by Al. So Heartstoppers is still one of my favorite comic books that I've read in a long time. The problem with this one is that we're getting into much more darker and scarier topics. This one has to deal with eating disorders and abusive family members, which is all handy and dandy, and I think it's important to tell. I'm just a little nervous to see where this is headed, and so by the end, I wasn't really enjoying our little batch having picked Paris because there was a lot of elements here that I found to be hard to read. I don't necessarily think that means I need to demote it to a 4. I think I was just really let down, which is why it ended up being a 4 out of 5 instead of 5 out of 5. Because I think ultimately this also did feel like kind of like its own little entity. It's a trip to Paris, you know, you're building on that romance. I'm a mixed bag on Heartstoppers, I'm gonna be honest. Oh, by the way, I want to mention, the next few books took place in a weekend reading vlog. I'll link it down below as well, as you guys can see me read them and experience them. And that would be Renegades by Marissa. I've owned Renegades for a long time now. I eventually gave Renegades the first one a 4 out of 5 stars. I want to make it very clear here so everybody understands. I honestly don't know how to describe these books. Deal with that. But this part of the book is not good. This part of the book, freaking phenomenal. Wish it was that good. The first 40 to 50% of the book I find to be really boring, in which there's a lot of action, there's a lot of things happening. It's not boring, I just find it boring. I just want to make sure that's clear. But the second half is so fascinating, so much fun. It's such a ride, and the romance is so slow and so oh, you just want to keep reading. This follows Nova as they live in Nova and Adrian as they live in Gallon City, where superheroes kind of exist, superheroes and supervillains. Nova is a supervillain who ends up in training the superheroes, where Adrian is, and yeah, shit happened. I read it during the week before I started the vlog, and I set my date wrong in my bullet journal. That is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I ended up reading A Court of Thorns and Roses to do a reread video for next month, where I talk about, it's basically my discussion book, as I've been waiting to get back into the series, and so I figured this was a great way to do so. I ended up getting this a 4 out of 5 stars. I still thoroughly enjoy this book series, and I'm very excited to jump back into them and continue on with The Court of Mist and Fury. I have really nothing to say here. This follows Freya as she is kidnapped, or not kidnapped, she is taken into the Frey ward for killing a wolf, essentially. She ends up falling in love with a pretty interesting fella, to say the least. Jason Reynolds for everyone. Oh, I did read 2 5 stars. This was on my list. And this is a 5 out of 5 for me personally. This is like a poem / like a letter to like dreamers. People who want to chase their dreams but are being told not to. It's phenomenal. I highly recommend this to every soul that I'll ever meet. Read it. Then I picked up my 2. This was I expecting to be a 5, maybe even a 4, but it was a 2. Doubt Volume 2. This is the conclusion to Doubt Volume 1. You get to kind of hear things on, I think it goes on for another few volumes, but at least the story is wrapped up here, except for like a little cliffhanger tease at the end that I didn't really care for. Doubt itself is about a game called White Rabbit. 6 characters get put into a building with barcodes who can open doors, and they keep dying off. I am a mysterious person. Who is the White Rabbit? And essentially, it's your goal is to find who the White Rabbit is. This book answers the question, who is the White Rabbit? Why did they keep killing people? I found it to be very disappointing. Almost annoying and shockingly aggravating. So, recommend. Like, it makes me not recommend the duology at all because I think it's just not worth the time. Can't really talk about this in any details because it is a sequel, but I picked up Arch Enemies, which I enjoyed a lot more than my Renegades, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars as well. So disappointing. I don't think a lot of things happen until maybe here, but if you really like the romance, it's worth it. If you like the story, nothing really happens to like maybe the last 110 pages, but the romance was budding. Magic. Then I also read Temporary Forever by Devin Akoy and Max something. This is a poetry collection about fandoms and romance and love and abusive relationships and so forth. And it's roughly between like 200 to 250 pages. And I still don't understand if it's 2 writers or an illustrator and a writer. I'm really hoping it's the latter because a lot of the stories in here, they just felt really repetitive and the fandoms were somewhat interesting, but also felt very not as fun to read from. It was a mixed bag. I kind of recommend it if you're interested. I picked this up because the After fandom, and there's a couple Hessa stuff in there. Then I picked up recently, like these are in the like past like 2 days. Given Volume 1, which is about a boy who is ridiculously amazing at guitar and another boy who wants to learn guitar, but is also ridiculously amazing at singing. There's other stuff that happens. This is very gay, which I enjoy. There's a lot of different gay romances and throughout the stories. There is a really sad element as well, and so I think it has the best of both worlds, in my opinion. I'm very excited. This is a very toxic relationship so far. I'm curious to see if it continues on being so toxic, but I will continue to read. We have Supernova, which is book 3 of the Renegades, and I also thoroughly enjoyed this one. This was a 5 out of 5. This one, the ending was, yeah, no, I recommend. I also want a sequel. That's where we're at. And then I picked up a memoir, which is Wildfire by Drew Barrymore. Wildfire follows Drew Barrymore, I don't know, I want to say 24 years of her life. It's written sporadically. It's written like every other memoir I've ever read before. They're essays, essentially. Some of them are poems. At least they say they're poems, but I would say they're mostly essays in my opinion. My opinion here is I really liked it. I love Drew Barrymore as a person. I love her voice. I like when she says fuck. These are things that I want to mention because a lot of people complain about them. I really like the audiobook. Personally, if I didn't read it physically, like on a CD, I listened to it on my phone, and I think it sounded just fine to me. But I do know people who listen to it on CD who has audio problems. I really liked it. I thought there was a lot of emotion to her voice. I liked the screaming bits. I liked the crying bits. I enjoyed it all. I think it was a nice thrill read. So not as good as like Anna Kendrick's, but it was fine. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I think it was missing something. I just can't tell you what. I just finished it, so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. And then I read something I thought I was gonna love, and I ended up not loving. I didn't rate it though, so that's important to note here. And that is Pretty Little Mistakes by Heather McLaughlin. This is basically a choose your own adventure adult version, except the few that I read I was really disappointed with. I like the idea so much that I personally feel like I can do better, so I'm going to start working on my own interpretation of one, just to play with it, to have kind of fun. But ultimately, I think I was relatively disappointed throughout the whole thing. And I was expecting it to be just you throughout the whole thing, and yet it does very much personify that we as a reader are female, and if you're reading it trying to choose your own adventure, making it a gender thing, it makes it really hard for someone to dive into the character and experience it yourself. A lot of these different scenarios did not need anything except for certain objects with like pregnancy and stuff, but then again, I think all the stories that I end up eventually getting pregnant end up being handled so poorly that I kind of wish they were cut entirely. So, but guys, those are the 15 books I read in month of May. What did you guys read? How are your guys' ratings? Did you guys enjoy? And yeah, I'll see you all next time for another video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.